was asked in quite a number of forum, you see, whether these ESGs, SDGs, values and whatnot, shall it be integrated within the Sharia approval that is given by the Sharia scholars? You see, it is a challenge. I mean, we have several debates, several discussions, and there are certain companies at the moment, I mean, they do have, I mean, apart from the usual requirements, take for example in the screening of a company, whether it comply or not, I mean the activities of the company, the financial ratio and whatnot, that is the usual screening that we are following it. But over and above that, we need to go beyond that to screen what are the social impact of the company, what are the environmental impact, and all those values that is integrated within the SDGs and also ESG and whatnot. You see, so there are certain index that have started doing this. You see, and when we are giving the Sharia approval at the moment, I would say that what we inform the industry is that, I mean, in terms of compliance, it comply, but then it is a best practice that we try to invest in a company which comply with all the values of SDGs and whatnot. I mean, personally, I've given one of the view, perhaps moving forward in the future, in providing a Sharia view, you see, I'm not ruling out the possibility of us having a kind of rating for the different approval that is being given. Take for example, you might have certain products that do comply with the Sharia, the basic compliance only, meaning that it complies with the legal requirement of Sharia. So the second level of compliance is that it complies with the legal and also ethical environment. So you can go up and up, you see.
Assalamu alaikum and very good morning. I think I would like to touch on the compatibility of SDGs with the Maqasid. What are the key differences or what are the convergence, commonalities between the two? So when we look at the central objective or central purpose of Sharia, what is called Maqasid al-Shari'ah, is actually can be summarized as facilitation of ease and removal of hardship, jalbul maslahah wa dar'ul mafsadah. So you attain what is good and then you remove what is harmful. So as Rafi mentioned in the beginning during his keynote speech, that there are 5 categories of maqasid. So preservation of religion, life, intellect, lineage, as well as wealth. So these categories, which have been proposed by Al-Ghazali back in year 505 Hijrah before. So to this end, we can say that the approach and the framework of SDGs is closely compatible with the underlying ethos of Maqasid al-Shari'ah. I mean, from the perspective of combating various forms of deprivations, be it sustenance, healthy life, good education, social status, all the 17 SDGs that have been underlined. So they are compatible and share same features, commonalities between SDGs and Maqasid. Similarly, with the conservation of sea, ocean, climate, and whatnot. What we need to emphasize is that the primary objectives of all developmental schemes that we have is to enable human community to attain minimum essentialities of life, which is necessary for the dignified survival. So, as mentioned as well in the framework of Maqasid, there are 3 levels of Maqasidic public interest or maslahah, which is necessities, needs, and luxurious. What is called daruriyat, tahsiniyat, and daruriyat, hajiyat, and tahsiniyat according to the level. So, but the thing is it all SDGs and Maqasid are aligned? Isn't there any differences at all? So from my point of view, one should look at the original origins or the philosophical origin of SDGs and Islamic finance. When we talk about reimagining Islamic finance, so we need to look at what are the philosophical difference, the origins of SDGs and Islamic finance. I think Rafi also mentioned when our pioneers of Islamic finance started the industry back 4 decades ago, 2 elements, risk sharing and social responsibility, are key elements in driving the industry. But yet, now we are talking about SDGs, which are actually embedded within the Islamic finance itself through the Maqasid al-Shari'ah. So the origin of SDGs actually evolved because of the market failures. Market failure caused by the excessive capital accumulation and financialization. And then the elements of Maqasid al-Shari'ah is already embedded within the Islamic finance. But the question is, how does Islamic finance embrace and implement these expectations throughout since the beginning until now? In addition to that, what is lacking in SDGs and ESG is the religious elements. In other words, Sharia compliance is not part of the element of SDGs. Hence, the elements of interest, gambling, and uncertainty, which are the core prohibitions in Islamic finance, might still be there in SDGs transactions. In this regard, the Central Bank of Malaysia, Bank Negara Malaysia, has introduced value-based intermediation, in which the objective is actually to look into both, emphasizing on the Sharia compliance of the Islamic financial offerings, as well as looking into impact and values on the society and environment while making the profits. So I believe these are the areas where the convergence and divergence between SDGs and Maqasid al-Shari'ah.
The compatibility between SDGs and the Maqasid al-Shari'ah. Although we talk about the 5 Maqasid, but in fact, I'd like to go beyond this. Although these are 5 Maqasid initiated by Imam al-Ghazali, and then Shatibi later on elaborated on it, and then Ibn Ashur elaborated on that. And Ibn Ashur, rahimahullah, a Tunisian scholar, he mentioned that it's not just these 5, but these are the essentials of Maqasid, but it can go beyond the 5. It can go to 20, 30, not just 5. So when we go with Ibn Ashur's view, we see that yes, it is compatible with that, but I definitely agree with Dr. Marjan here. When we go to the details, we do find the devil in the details. We have in some definitions disagreement between Sharia and SDGs. So for instance, like Rafi's example, the gaming industry, and then if it's involved the child labor, then they refrain classifying this as compliant. But from Islamic point of view, it's still not non-compliant. So yes, we have some differences, as well as the political issue, which I don't want to touch upon, but here you go. When we go and define gender, from Islamic point of view, let alone the political and the social definition, we have some disagreement. So it's not fully compliant with the details of the Maqasid al-Shari'ah and the Sharia in general, but nevertheless, it is more likely, let's say, more than 90% compatible.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم. I greet you with the greeting of Islam, of peace in a world of strife. I'd like to focus on two structural aspects, because the SDGs introduce an interesting word to the word development, and that word is sustainable, and it's one of the few development goals that aspires to be sustainable. I'd like to focus on that point and the synergy between that and the objectives and the principles of Sharia. Now, I'd like to make the point that I don't believe that the ethics or the intentions or objectives of the Sharia are a separate or a post facto consideration to the law itself. I believe that those things are cooked in very well by God into his legal system. And so it's not possible, in my view, to be Sharia compliant without pursuing the objectives of the Creator. If it were possible to obey God's law but disobey his intention, then God would not be God, and his law would not be worth its salt. Right. So with that backdrop, what I'd like to focus on is two key points. There's lots of things we could focus on. The first is growth, and the second is debt. Now, within the expression sustainable development goals, we have the word development. And often we use the word development as though it's synonymous to growth. But actually, in reality, development doesn't mean you have to grow. We're all adults in this room. At some point, we all pretty much stopped growing. I stopped growing earlier than most of you, which makes me shorter, smaller. You can't tell when I'm sitting. But in our adult life, we don't expect to grow anymore. If I go home and my wife says, "Darling, you've got a growth on your nose," that's not a good thing. So not all growth is good, and yet we seem to celebrate growth just for the sake of growth. And if you look within the SDGs, there are some of those contradictions. So the SDG goal number 8 aspires towards every country, every nation, every population having a GDP growth of 3%. Now, the reality is that's just simply not sustainable, and it's not consistent with its other goal of being ecologically sustainable. So we have to really consider what does growth mean, what does development mean, and what does the Sharia expect us to do in that regard. The reality is the whole world needs to swallow a very, very bitter pill, and that's one of the big elephants in the room. When we say sustainable, what we mean is that there has to be, you see, development requires consumption. When you grow, and you grow an economy, you build things, you grow food, that requires somebody to eat that food, somebody to consume those consumables. So it requires a massive amount of consumption to consume all of that so-called development. And actually, God didn't create us, I think, according to Islam, to consume so much. And there's a lovely verse in the Quran where God criticizes those who consume too much, and he says, وَتَأْكُلُونَ التُّرَاثَ أَكْلًا لَمًّا, and you consume your legacy. The word used here is actually legacy. The word turath, it's a slightly unusual word in that context. You might wonder why that word is used. We consume our legacy without right, i.e. we consume other people's share. That's what it means, to consume other people's share. So particularly in the richer developed nations, for want of a better expression, we need to swallow that bitter pill that we have to reduce our per capita consumption. That's the reality. And we can't simply blame poor countries for having too many people. We've got to realize that the richer part of the world consume far too much and far more than their true share. So I think one of the objectives of Sharia is for us to develop, not necessarily to grow, and not to develop to death.